There are moments in history when truth isn't destroyed. It's simply hidden, like a candle placed beneath a bushel, waiting for the right seeker to uncover it. Reincarnation, the idea that our souls return across lifetimes to learn, love, and evolve, may be one such truth. Whispered in the earliest Christian centuries, it now lies veiled beneath layers of doctrine, decisions, and silence. Imagine a version of Christianity where the soul's journey didn't end in a single breath, but stretched across the ages, touching countless lives. What if this vision was once embraced, before councils convened, before empires sought control over salvation? There is something both mystical and melancholic about truths lost not by accident, but by intent. Ancient scrolls were burned, theologians like Origen condemned, and alternate interpretations carefully edited out of sacred texts. Yet history has a peculiar way of preserving echoes. In the crevices of Scripture, in the writings of long-forgotten mystics, we find glimpses of a deeper belief, that the soul is eternal, returning to learn the lessons it once failed to master. Why was such a compassionate view, one that allowed grace to unfold over lifetimes, erased? And what does it mean that this idea still resonates today? Finding fertile ground in the hearts of spiritual seekers? Could it be that reincarnation was never fully extinguished, just exiled, like a prophet ahead of its time? The mystery isn't merely theological, it's personal. Because if reincarnation once lived within Christianity, then part of our spiritual inheritance has been kept from us. And perhaps, by unearthing it, we don't just rediscover an old idea. We remember something our souls have always known, something we've lived before, long before the birth of Christ, before the creeds and cathedrals. The idea of reincarnation moved like a sacred thread through the spiritual fabric of humanity. In the shadowed corridors of ancient Egypt, where towering pyramids stood as silent guardians of cosmic mysteries, priests whispered of the soul's passage beyond death. The Book of the Dead spoke of trials, judgment, and the chance to return, to try again, to grow, to evolve. Thousands of miles away, the Vedic sages of India sat by the Ganges, speaking of samsara, the cycle of birth and rebirth, and moksha, the liberation earned only after lifetimes of inner work. Karma was not punishment, but balance, a divine record of deeds echoing across existences. Even in the marble temples of Greece, reincarnation found voice. Pythagoras, more than a mathematician, was a mystic who believed each life was a step on the ladder of the soul. Plato echoed him. Their wisdom suggests that our souls are older than we remember, and that we are not walking this path for the first time, but retracing ancient steps in search of wholeness once again. Before the creeds were carved in stone and the Bible was bound in gold, Christianity was a living, breathing tapestry, woven with wonder, mystery, and spiritual diversity. In the centuries following Jesus' life, the early followers weren't united by doctrine, but by a deep yearning to understand the divine and the soul's purpose. These communities, scattered across deserts, coastlines, and ancient cities, shared letters, visions, and sacred stories, each interpreting Christ's message through the lens of their time and culture. Moving through lifetimes like a pilgrim chasing the light, the spiritual path wasn't confined to a single lifespan, but stretched far beyond, allowing space for mistakes, for redemption, for soul-deep transformation. These Christians didn't fear questions, they welcomed them. They didn't rush to close the mystery, they sat within it. Some believed the soul, after death, would return in a new form, continuing its sacred journey toward divine reunion. It was a belief not born of rebellion, but of awe, of the intuitive sense that one life could never be enough to contain all the lessons, the love, the unraveling of what it means to be human. Back then, faith was less about rigid dogma and more about mystical possibility. So what changed? Who decided this soulful vision no longer belonged? And why? Each one a step closer to God. Perhaps, in remembering what the early Christians once knew, We are not learning something new, but recalling something eternal. In the golden twilight of early Christianity, there walked a man whose mind stretched across the heavens and whose soul reached deep into forgotten mysteries. His name was Origen of Alexandria. Philosopher, theologian, mystic, he stood at the crossroads of worlds, bridging the esoteric wisdom of Egypt and Greece with the emergent voice of Christianity. To Origen, the soul was not some fleeting creation, but an eternal traveler, shaped by lifetimes, sculpted by experience, ever drawn toward the divine. He envisioned a cosmos infused with justice and grace, burning away ignorance and illusion until it stood pure before God. Each soul, he wrote, comes into the world strengthened by the victories or weakened by the defeats of its previous lives. It was a vision both humbling and empowering, one that placed responsibility not on rigid ritual, but on the soul's eternal striving. But such a view threatened power. In a world where the church was rising alongside empire, a soul that did not need saving in a single lifetime was a soul harder to control. And so Origen, once revered, was condemned. Centuries later, in our time of spiritual awakening, Origen's voice rises again, carried on the winds of curiosity and longing. His life reminds us that mystery is not the enemy of faith, it is its heartbeat, and that beneath the surface of Christian history lies a treasure still waiting to be reclaimed. The soul's sacred right to return, to remember, to rise. In the shadowy corridors of imperial palaces and Catholic cathedrals, a quiet war was waged, not with swords, but with scripture. By the 6th century, Christianity was no longer a loose tapestry of beliefs. It had become an instrument of empire, and with that transformation came a need for control. At the heart of this shift stood Emperor Justinian and his formidable wife, Empress Theodora, rulers not just of lands, but of souls. They convened the Second Council of Constantinople in 553 AD, posed a quiet rebellion against centralized spiritual authority. If the soul had multiple lifetimes to evolve, then salvation was not a single desperate bargain, but a journey written in stars and memory. This idea threatened the Church's growing role as gatekeeper of eternal fate. One life, one chance. That was the narrative that gave urgency to obedience and tithes. Justinian understood this. So did Theodora, whose own turbulent past may have fueled a deep desire to sever the soul from cycles of return. Together, they wielded doctrine like a blade. Origen's teachings were condemned, but a vision of the soul as timeless, evolving, and gloriously free. What if the Bible itself still carries faint echoes of a truth long silenced, fragments of reincarnation hidden not in absence? Then there's the curious moment in John 9, when Jesus' disciples ask him if a man was born blind due to his own sins before birth. When Jesus speaks to Nicodemus of being born again, is it only a metaphor for spiritual renewal, or a veiled acknowledgement of the soul's recurring journey through flesh and form? These verses shimmer with ambiguity, resisting closure. Perhaps they are remnants of a more mystical Christianity, one that accepted the soul's vast, unfolding path. Over time, as councils clarified doctrine and theologians standardized meaning, these mysteries were quieted, but they were never erased. They remain like half-lit rooms in a sacred mansion. But continuity, a bridge between ancient knowing and modern seeking. Perhaps the question isn't whether reincarnation is in the Bible, but whether we are finally ready to read it with wonder, but as an ancient melody remembered in the soul. In our era of restless searching, where the noise of the world often drowns out the whisper of the spirit, evolving through each lifetime like seasons in a grand spiritual cycle. This ancient belief, once banished from Western doctrine, returns not with fire and fury, but with quiet resonance. It speaks to those who feel that one life could never hold all the lessons or contain all the love. For seekers disillusioned by rigid systems of reward and punishment, Reincarnation offers something radical: patience, grace extended over time, a divine curriculum where mistakes are not final, but formative. Through renewed contact with Eastern philosophies, Hinduism, a way to understand growth, responsibility, and the soul's deep yearning to remember its true nature. In this reawakening, there's a sense of poetic justice. What was silenced has returned, not with institutional power, but with personal truth. It rises in yoga studios, in whispered dreams, in the stories of children who recall names they've never learned. It glows in books, in regression sessions, in the unspoken sense that we've been here before. Perhaps we're not discovering reincarnation anew. Perhaps we are remembering it, as if a door within us had always been waiting to open, quietly, onto a path we once walked long ago. In a world increasingly driven by data and logic, reincarnation might seem like a relic of mysticism, but what if science is beginning to trace its outline? In quiet therapy rooms and academic halls, researchers are listening to the echoes of lives once lived. Children, barely old enough to tie their shoes, speak names of strangers long dead, describe distant towns they've never seen, recount deaths they never suffered, yet their stories align with real people, real places. Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist from the University of Virginia, spent decades investigating these uncanny accounts. With methodical care, he documented thousands of cases where children recalled vivid, verifiable details from previous lives. These stories defy the boundaries of chance. They suggest a deeper reservoir of memory, a kind of soul archive that the subconscious sometimes accesses, and beyond childhood recollections, but lives. Some speak of being soldiers, healers, mothers, or wanderers in ancient lands. And oddly, healing follows. Lifelong phobias dissolve. Grief softens. Wounds with no logical origin begin to make sense. Psychology, once skeptical, is learning to hold space for the possibility that our emotional burdens may span lifetimes. These aren't mere fantasies. They're narratives packed with emotion, wisdom, and transformation. Reincarnation, then, is not just a metaphysical belief. It's becoming a therapeutic lens, one that helps people find meaning, closure, and peace. As neuroscience explores memory and consciousness more deeply, perhaps we'll uncover that the mind is more than a product of one life. Perhaps we carry imprints, soul scars, and sacred lessons from places we've forgotten but never truly left. What if your greatest fear or your deepest longing belongs not only to you, but to who you've been before? What if your soul is older than you think? What if the aching in your heart, the spark of déjà vu, or the strange familiarity of a place you've never been isn't coincidence, but memory? Not from this life, but from another. Reincarnation speaks to something deeply human, a feeling that we are not just here by chance, but as part of a long, unfolding journey. It paints each of us as an eternal pilgrim, walking through time with purpose, gathering wisdom like stones in a satchel. Each lifetime becomes a chapter, each experience, joy or sorrow, a lesson etched onto the soul's tapestry. In a world obsessed with fast answers and instant results, reincarnation invites us to slow down, to see our lives not as isolated flashes, but as part of something vast, ancient, and divine. It softens the harshness of finality and reframes suffering, not as punishment, but as opportunity for growth. Perhaps the people you meet are old companions. The challenges you face echoes from unresolved stories. There's beauty in the idea that nothing is wasted. Even your mistakes, your heartbreaks, your silent prayers, they ripple across lifetimes, shaping who you are becoming. And if we are indeed souls in motion, returning again and again, then we are also souls becoming, reaching closer to love, to truth, to God. Reincarnation isn't just a spiritual theory. It's a poetic lens, a way of understanding your place in the cosmos. And whether you believe in one life or many, the invitation remains the same. Live with intention, love deeply, forgive generously, grow without fear. For the soul, timeless and tireless, will always find its way, wandering through stars and centuries, not to escape life, but to embrace it more fully with every return. Across time, scripture, science, and soul-searching, the idea of reincarnation emerges not as fantasy, but as a forgotten thread woven through our spiritual heritage. From ancient temples to early Christian whispers, from suppressed doctrines to modern awakenings, it speaks of a soul in motion, learning, evolving, remembering. Whether glimpsed in sacred texts, childhood memories, or the quiet stirrings of déjà vu,